This will be the deposition of former Chief of Police Erika Shields taken pursuant to notice and agreement. The deposition is taken in the case Tyler Griffin versus the City of Atlanta. The deposition will be taken pursuant to the federal rules for all purposes permitted by the rules, including use at trial. And the deposition is being taken on Zoom because of the COVID pandemic. Madam Court Reporter, will you please swear in the witness?
Yes, sir. Before I do, I must ask counsel to please identify yourself and state on the record that you have no objection to this officer of the court administering a binding oath to this witness remotely. We can please begin with the noticing attorney.
Sure. This is Matt Kahn from Butler Law Firm for Plaintiff Tyler Griffin, and we have no objection.
Stacey Miller from the City of Atlanta for the City Defendants, and we have no objection.
Jacquita Parks for the City of Atlanta for the City Defendants, no objections.
Thank you. Ms. Shields, if you will please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm testimony you're going to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you.
Right. Well, before we get started, Chief Shields, I want to thank you for being here today. We really do appreciate your willingness to participate in this case. We know that based on your record of service, you deeply care about the City of Atlanta and the people that live in it. Then we think that your testimony in this case is going to help our client, but it's also going to help protect other people in the communities that the City of Atlanta Police Department serves. So to get started, will you please state your full name for the record?
Well, it's Erika, E-R-I-K-A, Shields, S-H-I-E-L-D-S.
And Chief Shields, will you please walk me through your education, beginning with high school and finishing with any advanced degrees?
So I graduated high school in 1985. I got a bachelor's degree in international studies and history in 1990. I have completed a master's degree in criminal justice in early 2000. I'd have to double check the date.
And where, from where are your degrees?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the bachelor's, I was at Webster University, W-E-B-S-T-E-R University, and I was located in St. Louis, Missouri. And for the master's, I did that while I was working, and that was through St. Leo University, and they're out of Florida.
Is it true that you left a career as a stockbroker for a career as a public servant?
I did, yes. I did that in about 1993 or 94. I would have done that, yes.
Okay. And so I understand that you've been with the City of Atlanta Police Department for about 25 years, if my math is correct. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
During those 25 years of service, have you received any specialized training?
A significant amount, yes.
We could probably spend an entire deposition just going over your training, but if you want to just sort of summarize the specialized training that you've had, I think that'll probably be a little better.
I think, when you recruit training in and of itself is a solid 8 months. And then on top of that, supervisory training, use of force training, leadership training. So it runs the gamut. It just changes. Criminal justice training. It's just a whole variety of things.
Are you certified to instruct any courses or materials?
No, I intentionally avoided that.
Hear that. So are you familiar with the use of force standard operating procedures?
I am, yes.
Okay. What was your first position with APD?
An officer, well, a recruit. So you go through the academy as a police recruit. And then once you've completed recruit training, you get sworn in as a an officer, and we start all officers working 911.
Okay. And after your time as an officer, you were promoted to sergeant. Is that correct?
Right. So you have to be eligible to take the sergeant's exam. So when I was eligible, I took the sergeant's exam, was a sergeant for a few years, and then I was eligible to take the lieutenant's exam. And I took that. And then once you've completed that, from that point forward, it's by appointment, not civil service testing.
Okay. During your time as a sergeant, were you with OPS or the Office of Professional Standards at all?
For a portion of it, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. For a portion of it, as my time as a sergeant, I was assigned to OPS Internal Affairs.
How long were you with OPS during that time?
I'd say 2 years about.
While you were with OPS, did you investigate police misconduct?
I did, yes.
Did you ever investigate allegations of excessive force?
I did, yes.
Can you ballpark the number of excessive force allegations that you, or investigations, excuse me, that you conducted during that 2-year period?
You know, I don't know offhand, and sometimes you might not be the primary on the investigation, but you would assist a colleague with it, particularly if it involved a number of individuals, either accused or witnesses. I honestly don't know.
Okay. I guess would it be fair to say though that you did a fair number of investigations and are familiar with the process?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Would you agree that part of being an OPS investigator is applying the use of force standards to real world scenarios?
Yes,
Yeah. And after OPS, I understand you worked with the advocacy unit. Is that correct?
right. So the advocacy unit is a component of OPS, and the focus of that unit is on those employees who are facing discipline that is, I won't say more severe, but it's going to impact their pay. And so it required a significant amount of liaising with the law department.
Okay. So is it fair to say then that during your time as a sergeant, you became intimately familiar with APD's disciplinary process?
I did, yes.
And then after, I think we covered this some, but not all. After sergeant, you were promoted to lieutenant.
That's correct.
And then after lieutenant, you were promoted to major.
That's correct.
And then I guess at that point, it's appointments. And so then you were appointed next to deputy chief.
Correct.
And then deputy chief, you were appointed to chief of police.
Correct.
Okay. As of April 5th, 2019, were you the chief of police?
Yes, I was.
And again, this is a fairly broad question, so feel free to just hit the high points. But what are your duties as the chief of police?
You're responsible for the performance of the department and its employees, and obviously our fundamental responsibility, and it takes on a number of avenues, is public safety and the safety of the community.
Is it fair to say that that the chief of police is essentially the CEO of the Atlanta Police Department?
Correct.
And as chief, you are responsible for approving changes to APD standard operating procedures?
Correct.
Okay. So I understand that you were fairly outspoken about police brutality in the wake of George Floyd's death. And I just wanted to ask, what compelled you to speak out after Mr. Floyd's death?
Well, I believe as police leaders, we have a responsibility to lead in the space of policing correctly, and to not speak up would have been a grave failure on my part and the part of other chiefs, quite frankly.
And what made you decide to walk with the protesters in Atlanta?
It was apparent. It was a level of anger and hurt that I had not witnessed before, even with all of the protests that occur in Atlanta. And it was apparent that they needed to be heard. And as the person responsible for the police department, I felt that I had an obligation to hear them.
As a country, do you think that we face problems with police brutality and systemic racism?
I think as a country, we absolutely have systemic racism in all facets of society. I think there are incidents of police brutality. I don't necessarily think that it's as widespread as some would believe, but I think that some of the situations have been so egregious, it's hard to have confidence in law enforcement.
Do you think that these problems exist in the city of Atlanta? Those
think
problems being police brutality and systemic racism.
I think they're in every facet of society, specifically systemic racism.
To what do you attribute the city's problem with police on citizen violence?
Objection, but you can answer.
To what? I'm sorry, do you mind repeating that one more time, sir?
Sure. To what do you attribute the city's problem with police on citizen violence?
I think that you will find isolated incidents where an officer either operates in poor judgment, loses their temper. I don't think it's systemic within the department. I don't think it's widespread or condoned by their colleagues. But I do think individuals on an individual basis will engage in behavior that clearly is inappropriate and, more significantly, not necessary.
What sort of policy changes do you think are necessary to eliminate police officers' use of excessive force on citizens within APD?
I think for any agency, we have been afforded finally a window into police operations on a day-to-day basis through body-worn camera. And I think that it's incumbent upon all law enforcement agencies to have body-worn cameras and to consistently audit them so that we can vet out any misappropriate behavior before it escalates. So I think that it's there. The solution is there. We just need to leverage it appropriately.
That's a good segue into my next question, I think. Would you agree that one of the most important tools to combat the use of excessive force is a strong stance on disciplining police misconduct?
You have to, yes, you have to hold officers accountable when they're wrong.
Do you agree that without proper discipline, police officers can use force with impunity?
Yes.
Where do you stand on a zero tolerance policy for police officers' use of excessive force?
I think that it's not that black and white, that every situation has mitigating factors. And so you have an obligation to look at all of the factors to see what brought the officer to the space where they used force. And you can have guidelines, but you definitely need to take the time to look at each incident individually.
Okay. Should police departments keep a lookout for officers who are repeatedly accused of excessive force?
They go on early warning, and which is a to your phrase, a lookout. It's flagging them as having a pattern that needs to be paid attention to.
So what criteria must be met for an early warning to be alerted?
It's in our policy. I think it's 2 or more excessive force in a year, or I would have to review it, but it's automated within internal affairs and it flags the employee.
Okay. And so why is it important to keep a lookout for officers who are repeatedly accused of excessive force?
It may be an indicator that an employee needs additional training, doesn't need to police, or it may be that they were fully justified in their use of force, but without paying appropriate attention to it, you're not going to know.
Not too long after Mr. Floyd's death, Rashard Brooks was killed by Atlanta police officers. I understand that you resigned as chief shortly after Mr. Brooks' fatal shooting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why did you resign?
Objection. But you can answer.
I'll rephrase that question for the record. Why did you resign as chief of police?
It was a number of factors, but I would say that I felt that it was at the time in the best interests of the city and the police department. And it was the right thing to do when I did it.
I guess, can you elaborate on why it was the right thing, why you felt it was the right thing to do?
Objection. But you can answer.
I didn't feel that I don't necessarily think that the mayor and I were on the same page. And given the environment of the city at the time, I felt that it would be more damaging for us to publicly disagree. And it was just better at that time for the city and the department to step aside.
And what was the point of contention between you and Mayor Bottoms?
There wasn't one
Same
single
objection.
Sorry. There wasn't.
You can answer.
Okay, it was a culmination of multiple things.
Were there any positions on, I'll strike that. Was there any disagreement on the status of an excessive force problem within the Atlanta Police Department that was the cause of disagreement?
Was there
Objection,
any,
but you can answer.
and I'm sorry, I don't mean, can you help me with that question again?
Sure, I'll re-ask that question. That was a terrible question. That's my fault.
I'm not going to say that.
Was your disagreement with Mayor Bottoms, did it have anything to do with the handling of excessive force within the Atlanta Police Department?
A component of it was definitely that. But there was more to it than that as well.
And what was your position on how to handle excessive force that Mayor Bottoms disagreed with?
Objection. And I'm going to instruct my client not to answer.
On what basis?
On the basis of attorney-client privilege.
Who is the attorney?
The attorney is the city attorney, Nina Hickson, and I am aware of conversations that were had between Chief Shields and the mayor in front of Ms. Hickson regarding this particular matter. So I'm going to instruct my client not to respond.
Okay. Chief Shields, did you have any discussions with Mayor Bottoms about the use of force within the Atlanta Police Department, or excuse me, handling of use of force within the Atlanta Police Department where Ms. Hickson was not present?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Let me. I don't believe so.
Okay. Was Ms. Hickson actively participating in the conversation, or was she simply present?
Same
She was-
objection. You don't have to answer.
No. Okay.
So the question is asked in order to establish whether the attorney-client privilege actually does apply. So will you be taking the advice of the City of Atlanta's attorney and not answering that question?
Yes.
Okay. Was the purpose of the discussions with Mayor Bottoms to seek legal advice?
Same objection, and you don't have to answer.
Will you be taking the advice of the City of Atlanta's attorney and not answering that question?
Yes.
All right. I want to share my screen with you briefly, if you give me just a second. Can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 80 on your screen, Chief Shields?
Yes.
I want to scroll down. Do you see the highlighted part of this? Or I guess let me take a step back. So this is an order that Mayor Bottoms entered on June 4th, 2020. Do you see the highlighted section where it says, there remains an urgent need to address issues of police violence, systemic racism, and the need for transformation of our justice system?
Yes.
Do you agree with Mayor Bottoms that there is a systemic problem with police violence and racism in the city of Atlanta?
Do I read that? I'm not sure. Does this all apply to the police department, or is she saying there's systemic racism across society?
Well, I believe it's an order that was entered for the city of Atlanta. So I guess I'll just ask the question again. Do you agree, or I guess let me rephrase the question. Do you think that there is a systemic problem with police violence and racism in the city of Atlanta?
No.
What is your current role with APD?
I actually am not with the police department. I work for the city's technology department as a deputy director.
So who do you report to?
Gary Brantley.
And who does Gary Brantley report to?
I believe he would report direct. I know he would. He would report directly to the COO.
Okay. And in your current role, are you able to help APD address police violence?
No.
What are your duties under your current role?
It's really managing technology projects that apply across the public safety platform. So whether it's the video integration center and its cameras, the operation of them, getting in a new 911, what we call a CAD system, so that upgrading the entire 911 system, call taking system. We replaced the entire reporting process for the Atlanta Police Department. So all of your police reports have changed platforms. So it's really in the weeds on the technology, not the operations of the department, the police department.
Who would you say is responsible for policing the Atlanta police?
Well, I think first and foremost is we are responsible as law enforcement to police one another and speak up when we're witnessing any infractions. So I would expect that of everyone. From a more formalized standpoint, each individual has a supervisor that they report to. But for myself, who would report to the chief, who would report to a mayor. So it's fairly well defined, but to be effective, there has to be greater accountability amongst one another, regardless of who's in the formal chain of command.
Would you say that OPS is one oversight measure in place to keep APD officers in line?
Oh, certainly, certainly. I think the incidents get to them, hopefully. So they're definitely a component of it, yes.
Would you say that another component of oversight would be the Atlanta Citizen Review Board?
Yes, I like what they do. I like it a lot. And I think that their frustration is more people don't use them. And it's, you know, and that came out during the protests, was there was all this call to create a citizen review board, and we have a fully operational one.
So other than OPS and ACRB, are there any other oversight like entities or committees in place that police the police?
Formalized, formalized that have some level of jurisdiction, I would say not. Well, no, I need to back up there. That's incorrect. So the state has POST, the Peace Officer and Standards Training Council. And honestly, they're the big dog, and to the extent of if they choose to pull an officer's certification for this, regardless of what a department wants to have occur with the employee then is not authorized to police in the state of Georgia. So clearly, POST, as it's referred to, has a significant say in whether an officer's conduct is appropriate or not.
How does a case of misconduct make its way to POST?
It has to, the action has to be egregious enough. There's certain criteria, so any officer arrest would make it there. An officer who receives, I believe, 30 days suspension or is terminated would make it there. There's defined benchmarks, but you might have an officer, a domestic violence would make it there. And it's the responsibility of internal affairs to forward that information to POST.
Do you think that it's important for police to have oversight, or excuse me, let me rephrase that question. Do you think it's important to police the police, or another way of saying it is to have oversight over the police?
I certainly think that when you look broadly, excuse me, it is important to have other eyes on a police department, largely because you may become, if you're a part of the department, inoculated to something that is detrimental. So I don't think I haven't found it to be a negative. I found the feedback from both Post and ACRB to be highly purposeful throughout the years.
When you say inoculated to something detrimental, what do you mean by that?
I think that in any industry, its cultures start to evolve. And sometimes it takes the view of an outsider to say, that's not appropriate. Why are you doing that? You know, if you're hanging lewd photos in your office and you work with all men, it's the norm. You hire the woman and she comes in and she says, you know, that's really not appropriate in the rest of the world. You're like, oh, let me take them down. So I think that every industry has a culture, and sometimes you need an outsider to identify things that may be in front of you that you don't even see. And don't worry, you don't need to look behind you. There's no racy photo that I'm looking at, okay?
Well, in
let me
your home,
sweat
I think
that.
it's okay.
Oh, don't go there.
Oh, well, is it fair to say without proper oversight, police officers are more likely to engage in misconduct?
Oh, I think so. I think that it's, I mean, I think that you have to have oversight in large part because policing is a learned profession. And by that, I mean, you can spend hours and hours in a classroom, but you're really generally the police officers who are most proficient are the ones who've done it for a number of years and really know how to communicate well. And so that's where it's really appropriate that there's feedback and there's oversight, so you can redirect the newer officers when they're going down a path or making decisions that aren't solid.
Would you agree that that one reason OPS conducts an independent investigation is to maintain objectivity?
That is what they're tasked with, yes.
And why is objectivity important in that context?
It can be difficult for an individual to fairly see a person's actions when they work with and are cordial with that person every day. So I supervise you, but I also, you know, we have a bagel every morning together. It's maybe harder for me to see your behavior for what it is, as opposed to just saying, well, Matt's a good guy, he didn't mean it. And so the idea of having OPS handle the investigations is that they're supposed to shed an independent light on it. It doesn't always work. Sometimes opinions get inserted into the findings of fact, but that is what they're tasked with, yes.
Okay. And so is it excuse me, is it fair to say then that it's harder for an officer supervisor to be objective versus an independent investigator?
Generally, I think that's the case. It's not always the case, but I think generally that just goes along with human nature.
Would you agree that it is critical for OPS to provide thorough and impartial investigations of police misconduct?
Yes.
Why is it important for these investigations into police misconduct to be thorough?
There can be so many factors, and I think that you don't just owe it to the complainant, but you owe it to the officer to say, to gather all the available facts. There are things that you may unearth that completely exonerate the officer, and you owe it to them. But you also may unearth that their conduct is inappropriate, and you need to be able to either to show that to them, to hold them accountable, you owe it to the citizenry. I mean, I always try to tell folks is imagine you were treated this way or your mom was. I mean, would you be satisfied with the customer service we gave? So I think that for all involved parties, you have an obligation to really make sure that the investigation is above reproach and criticism.
Would you agree that all reasonable steps should be taken to assure that every OPS investigation is free from conflict of interest, bias, prejudice, and self-interest?
Yes.
What goes into a typical physical use of force OPS investigation?
Well, key amongst it is, of course, interviewing anyone who was either a witness to it, was the victim, gathering any camera footage that you can, whether it's body-worn camera or off a light pole, medical records. You just, depending on the incident at hand, it's going to vary somewhat, but there's some basic steps that you should take in all of them. Photographs.
And when a complaint is forwarded to OPS and it's assigned to an investigator, is it typically just that investigator working the file and doing these things, or does he have a team of folks helping him out or her out?
Typically, it depends on how involved the file is, and quite frankly, how high profile it is. So if you have something that's running in the news media, you want to be able to present closure as quickly as possible. And conversely, maybe it's not running in the media, but it's just there's 10 witnesses. The incident may have gone through a couple different locations. I mean, then you would want assistance with the file. Otherwise, you won't meet the timeline that you need to get it done in. So you want to do them as expeditiously as possible, but there are going to be mitigating factors that are going to determine whether or not more people need to be assigned to the case.
Okay. Is it fair to say by the end of a typical, to this extent one can be typical, that by the end of a typical OPS use of force investigation, the OPS investigator likely has the most knowledge about the matter?
They should, certainly, they should.
Now, and I may be using this phrase incorrectly, but is the chain of command typically involved in an OPS investigation? And I guess by that, what I'm really looking for is like, is if an officer is accused of excessive force, are his supervisors involved in the process?
If they were a witness to it, or they were working that night and they responded to the scene, I would expect them to be interviewed. So if they had any touch points with the actual incident itself, it would be fair to expect them to be interviewed. If they did not, then yes, they would be afforded the file once it comes out of internal affairs to review for disciplinary recommendations.
Do the supervisors take any part in the investigation process? Interviewing witnesses, looking at body camera footage, collecting photographs?
Certainly they could assist. They could assist in pulling the body-worn camera. So if I work zone 6 as a supervisor, I could assist in pulling the body-worn camera footage, providing it into internal affairs. I mean, they could assist if there was, I guess, some legwork that needed doing, but for the most part, it would be handled by, I would expect it to be handled by internal affairs.
Are you familiar with the Acrb investigation process?
I think I am, yes. There was some discussions on modifying it, and I don't know that those were ever adopted, but we're trying to, one of the things we're trying to do is adopt a technology platform so that the investigations can be streamlined to both places. That's not operational yet.
I guess let me take a step back. Can you explain what role ACRB serves?
It allows, I think first and foremost, it allows people who are not comfortable going to the police department to file a complaint, an avenue in which to file a complaint. Not everyone is comfortable dealing with the police. And so this is another way to hear someone. I think that's the main benefit of having them. And then also, well, I should say that is one benefit. And then the other benefit is they're doing an investigation that clearly is impartial. It may not be as thorough. I mean, just because, I don't know, limitations on resources or accessibility, or just quite frankly, lack of investigative experience, but it's still, you still have to pay attention to what they put forward, because they may present something that's a very reasonable objection to an officer's conduct.
So do ACRB investigators interview witnesses?
Yes. If the witnesses will come in, yes, but that's what they're doing. The idea is they do their own investigation.
Do ACRB investigators typically review the body camera footage if it's available?
Yes, they should.
And does the ACRB, do they apply APD standard operating procedures? Is that the metric that is used when doing an investigation?
That's the idea. It hasn't always gone real smoothly, because sometimes not so much under the current director, but previously they would have a tendency to blend criminal law in with work rules and want us to, and so that was harder to sift through. Under the current director, Mr. Reed, they've been more in line with what our work rules are.
And how long has the current director been in place?
Probably 4.5 years, maybe.
Okay. So the current director would have been in place in 2019 and 2018.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Do ACRB investigators typically have internal affairs experience?
I don't believe so. To be honest, these are questions better for Mr. Reed to answer. If they're not a former APD, but maybe they were former investigators somewhere else. So I really should just defer to him on that one, I think.
That's fair enough. All right. Are you familiar with the facts of this specific case?
No, I'm not actually.
Okay. Are you familiar at all with Defendant Donald Vickers?
No, I don't believe I know who he is.
What about Defendant Matthew Abad?
No, I don't know him either that I'm aware of.
Okay. Before today, have you watched any of the body camera footage from this case?
No, I have not.
So I'm gonna share my screen. I want to show a few clips to you.
Okay.
Let's see. Here sound. Can you see my screen, Chief Shields?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And if you have a problem hearing it, just let me know, and I'll try to see if I can fix it. All right, so this first video that I'm going to show you is marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.2.
Hey, stop the car! 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 Get out of the fucking car, Atlanta Police! Get out of the fucking car! Get out the car now! Get out the car!
And Buchanan.
Let's go. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Let's move. What are you doing, man?
What do you mean, what am I doing?
Tell me, what are you doing?
Wait a minute, hold on. Don't grab me like that.
No, hold on. No, hold on. No, hold on. You do not swipe my hands from me. Do you understand?
You got anybody else in the car? You got any weapons or anybody else? Go check the car. What's wrong with you, man?
Sorry. Is there anything wrong? Is there anything wrong with the way the police officers are behaving in Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.2?
Well, without the knowledge of why they were approaching the car, I don't know if it was a felony stop, if it's an armed robber. I mean, depending on the nature of the stop, I would want to know that to know why his gun is pointed at the individual. And then I'm also, again, to come out of the rear and tackle him, the question is what was the individual wanted for? I think that I would need to know that to know whether the threat that the officers felt they were being presented with.
Okay. So would it have been appropriate to point the gun at, so the man shown in the video is my client, Mr. Griffin. Would it have been appropriate for Defendant Abad to point his gun at Mr. Griffin if he had been pulled over under the suspicion of just a routine traffic stop?
I would not think so, no.
Would it have been appropriate for Defendant Vickers to tackle Mr. Griffin if they had pulled him over for violating or allegedly violating routine traffic laws?
No.
If the reason for them pulling Mr. Griffin over was for suspicion of violating traffic laws, would you agree that Defendant Vickers used excessive force when he tackled Mr. Griffin?
If it's routine traffic laws, he's not assaulted them, and fled, then yes, it would be excessive.
Is it fair to say that a police officer should not make a citizen walk on a seriously injured ankle?
If you're aware that someone's injured, you obviously should not do anything that will further compound the injury.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen again with you. Can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 30.1 on your screen?
Yes.
So this shows an X-ray of my client's ankle after Defendant Vickers tackled him. And I guess my question is have you seen this X-ray or this photo before?
No.
All right. I'll show you. Can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 30, which is a post-op X-ray scan of my client's ankle?
The screws in it, correct? Yep.
Yes, ma'am. Have you ever seen this this X-ray photo or scan before?
No, I have not.
Okay. I'm gonna show another video clip with you. This one's going to be marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 4.1.
Wow. Oh, oh, shit. Oh my God. Ah! Ah! Oh my God. Oh my God. Help me. Oh.
Did you see in Plaintiff's Exhibit 4.1 where Defendant Abad made Mr. Griffin stand up and walk?
Yes,
Would you agree that Mr. Griffin appears to be in pain in Plaintiff's Exhibit 4.1?
yes,
Would you agree that those officers should have called an ambulance for Mr. Griffin?
if they hadn't already, yes, they should have.
Would you agree that those officers should not have made Mr. Griffin walk in the first place if they knew his ankle was hurt?
I can see where they first got him on his feet to walk. You know, in their defense, they don't know the extent of the injury, and it is not uncommon to have uncooperative arrestees, suspects, or detainees flop, for lack of a better word, and not want to, just quite frankly, not want to get in the back of a patrol car. So I can see where initially they may have gotten him on his feet thinking that, in fact, okay, we can walk over here, we can get to the car.
Okay. Well, will you agree that those officers should have stopped trying to make Mr. Griffin walk after what you just saw in Plaintiff's Exhibit 4.1?
Either that or the other officer should have come over and lifted him on the other side so he could have walked on one foot.
Would you agree that police officers shouldn't make fun of hurt citizens?
No, of course not. I
They
mean, I
should-
agree.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I agree that they should not make fun of individuals who are injured.
Okay. I'm going to show another video clip that's marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 2.2.
What's wrong with you, man?
My left foot is.
What's wrong with your left foot?
It's tangled or something. I don't know.
It's got what?
A lot of weight on it.
Just a little bit.
A little heavier when drunk too.
That's all right.
Chief Shields, is it okay for a police officer to make fun of a citizen's weight?
Well, I don't think I heard it. I'm sorry.
Sure. I'll play it again.
Okay.
What's wrong with you, man?
My left foot is.
What's wrong with your left foot?
It's tangled or something. I don't know.
It's got what?
A lot of weight on it.
Just a little bit.
A little heavier when drunk too.
That's all right.
Were you able to hear that time, Chief Shields?
I think he's saying he's heavier when you're drunk. Is that right?
So he said I'm paraphrasing, I think, but he said, I'll just play it one more time. I don't want to get it wrong.
What's wrong with you, man?
My left foot is.
What's wrong with your left foot?
It's tangled or something.
So one of the officers said, it's got a lot of weight on it.
I don't know.
It's got what?
A lot of weight on
A lot of weight on it.
Just a little bit.
And then Vickers says, just a little bit, in a teasing manner.
A little heavier when drunk too.
And then the other officer says,
Objection.
a little heavier when he's drunk. Is it okay for a police officer to make fun of a citizen's weight during an arrest?
No.
Objection, asked and answered, but you can answer.
No.
That's all right. Man, Abad went to get him out of the car. And Abad's kind of like, what are you doing? And Abad's like, put your hand on. He did Abad like that. I did like 50.
Right. Hey man, come on man, get on up.
Here's his skid marks.
Did you hear where Defendant Vickers was talking to another officer and said, quote, I did like 50, end quote, and then said, quote, there's the skid marks, end quote.
Yes.
Chief Shields, is it okay for a police officer to brag about tackling a citizen while the citizen lay injured on the ground?
It's not appropriate, no.
What? Oh, get up. Come on. I have you get up. Come on.
We're laughing because you fell pretty hard after pushing an officer, man. I find that funny, man. You don't
Yeah,
touch
that was
officer,
real
man.
funny.
You don't
I
touch an
won't
officer.
do that.
Yo, you
That's
did do
bad.
that.
That's bad.
Chief Shields, did you hear where Defendant Vickers said, quote, we're laughing at you because you fell pretty hard after pushing an officer, man. I find that funny, man, end quote.
Yes, I heard that.
And then after that, he laughed at Mr. Griffin, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree that it's not proper for a police officer to laugh at an injured citizen?
I would agree.
What do you think about Defendant Vickers' conduct in Plaintiff's Exhibit 2.2?
And just for clarification, Vickers is the one who did the tackling?
Yes, he is.
Okay. I mean, I don't think, again, unless we're dealing with someone who is violent, has a, that we're concerned for their safety. We're concerned if they're facing a felony charge, are wanted for something violent, then I would not think that I would not support Vickers' decision-making.
I'm going to show you another video clip. The next one is going to be Plaintiff's Exhibit 4.2.
I would never drive on the wrong side of the road either.
Break it up, man. Ain't about that time to play with you, man. Come on.
1, 2, 3, go.
Come on, big boy.
You're not even trying. Come on, man.
Hey, man, don't put your weight on me.
Shit.
Why are you putting your weight on the foot that's supposed to be hurt?
Right,
I'm
let's
a
go.
good guy. I would never do that to you guys.
Bro, I don't even know you.
That's the bad thing. I'm not a
Do
good.
the bad thing. Let's go.
Yeah, I'll take him on to the Jeep.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Come on, man.
Oh
You're
my
shaking a
god!
little girl right now.
Fuck!
What is wrong with you, man?
Oh my god!
He doing that on purpose, man.
Come on, man.
He doing that on purpose.
Dude,
He keep rolling that on the side on purpose, man.
it hurts when you roll your own ankle.
Oh my god! Yes, it does.
No, man.
Oh my god! I would never lie to you.
All right, let me ask you a question.
Oh my
What do you
God.
expect to gain out of all this,
Oh my
man?
god! It hurts.
What do you
so
expect to
bad.
gain out of this?
Oh my god! Please just take the pain away. Oh my god! Oh my god!
Go ahead, Tom. Stay pain
Oh
away.
my god!
Hey, you want to show you a
Oh
little
my
trick to
God.
take pain out that
It
pain?
hurts.
You see major pain?
Oh my god!
Did you hear where Defendant Vickers told Mr. Griffin, quote, "You are such a little girl right now," end quote?
Yes.
Is it okay for police officers to hurt a citizen and then call them a little girl?
No.
Did you hear Defendant Vickers and the other officer laughing and joking about Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
And that's not okay either, is it?
No.
Is it fair to say, and again, but these questions are based under the assumption that this entire arrest was based on traffic violations and an alleged DUI. Is it fair to say that Vickers had other less violent options for dealing with Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that Vickers' use of force was not necessary?
It does not appear as though it was necessary.
Is it fair to say that the force that Vickers did use was extreme?
I would feel better if I could see these traffic stop and what happened on the traffic stop, so I would have the full narrative. That's a key part of the picture, and I'm not seeing that.
Okay. After watching Vickers' body camera footage, or excuse me, let me rephrase that. After watching the body camera footage showing Vickers, do you think Vickers was acting in good faith or sadistically?
Objection, but you can answer.
I don't, again, I'm going off the premise that Mr. Griffin had not assaulted the officers. I don't have the benefit of seeing. If he has punched them or tried to punch them and shown a level of aggression that makes it more than a traditional traffic stop, I could see where this escalated.
Mm-hmm.
I would feel better if I could see the traffic stop.
Have you
Yes.
seen? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Have you seen in any of the videos that you've seen? Have you seen anything that would indicate that Mr. Griffin was violent or is trying to escape?
No, I can't see that. And just given the segments that I've been afforded, does it seem excessive? Yes. To weigh in, absolutely. I would really prefer to see from start to the beginning, the initial encounter.
Okay. I can do that for you. If you just give me just a second.
Sure, that'd be great.
So, Chief Shields, can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.0 that is labeled Full Video ABAB?
I can,
Okay.
thank you.
So just to provide context, so this video is showing it's from ABAB's body worn camera footage as they are pursuing Mr. Griffin in an unmarked police car that has no siren, no markings or PA system or any indication that it is a police vehicle.
So these two are partners?
Yes, Vickers and
Okay.
ABAB are both in this vehicle.
Thank you. So at this point, they've not done a traffic stop. They've not had a conversation with him. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, stop the car! 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 Get out of the fucking car, Atlanta Police! Get out of the fucking car! Get out the car now! Get out the car!
And Buchanan.
Let's go. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Let's move. What are you doing, man?
What do you mean, what am I doing?
Tell me, what are you doing?
Wait a minute, hold on. Don't grab me like that.
No, hold on. Ow. No, hold on. No, hold on.
You do not swipe my hands from me. Do you understand?
You got him about.
Okay. So given now watching Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.0, showing the initial contact with Mr. Griffin through the use of force, is it fair to say that the force Vickers used was extreme?
I would say that it was unnecessary. You know, I think that it's not, they should have tried something before the tackle.
After watching the body camera footage, do you think that Vickers was acting in good faith or sadistically?
I don't think it was either.
Objection, but you can answer.
I don't think it was either. I think it was unnecessary.
Okay, so Vickers was not acting in good faith, correct?
I do not believe so, no.
Objection.
What's the basis of your objection? Ms. Miller,
I'm sorry, what did you say?
what is the basis of your objection?
Yes. Have you defined good faith?
Okay. Chief Shields, what do you think good faith means?
For the right reasons, the right intentions.
And so if you can explain, what did you mean when you expressed your opinion that Vickers was not acting in good faith?
I think that he came in with a head of steam and chose to tackle Mr. Griffin when I'm not sure that they could not have just leaned him against the car, put firm holds on him, and handcuffed him. But I will also say to you is, this is where officers, it's easy to judge them, but things can go south really quick too. But do I feel as though they could have tried something else that was more appropriate to the resistance that are being afforded? Yes.
Do you think that that a reasonable jury could find that Vickers was not justified in tackling Mr. Griffin?
Objection, but you can answer. And I think I may be on a lower internet speed because it seems like I'm lagging behind the conversation. Not exactly sure how I can fix that, but could we take a quick break? I mean, she can answer the question, but then after answering the question, can we take a break so I can try to see if I can boost my internet signal?
Sure, we could do that. So I'll ask the question one more time just so we have a clean record, and then we could take a quick 5-minute break.
Okay.
So the question was, do you think that a reasonable jury could find that Vickers was not justified in tackling Mr. Griffin?
Objection, but you can answer.
Juries, as you know better than anyone, are unpredictable. That being said, could a jury find that Vickers was using excessive force? Yes.
And I guess what you mean by that, if I may, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but what you mean by that is that a question of fact exists as to whether the force was justified.
Objection. I think you're asking for a legal conclusion, and so I'm gonna ask her, instruct her not to answer that.
Ms. Miller, as I'm sure you are aware, the only basis for instructing a witness not to answer is attorney-client privilege. And since that is not the basis of your objection, it is improper to instruct this witness not to answer. I also don't think you lay any foundation for what her understanding of the legal system is, what a jury would do or could do. So I think it's a proper objection. Now, she can answer to the extent that she knows, Sure.
but I don't think it was a proper question.
Well, your objection is noted and you have preserved your objection, but I can ask whatever I want with or without laying foundation. And then that's a question for the judge to rule on later. So your objection is noted. And I'll re-ask the question. If I can remember what it was. Oh, so the question was, how I interpreted your previous response to mean was that a question of fact exists to whether the force was justified. Is that what you meant?
Objection, but you can answer.
I just think that juries are unpredictable. I don't think there's rhyme or reason with juries sometimes. So that's all I meant.
That's fair. So Ms. Miller, do you need to take a break or can we keep going?
Let's take a 5-minute break just so I can see what's going on. And then we can come back at, I guess, 11:05.
Okay, perfect.
I am.
Yes.
Here we go. Okay. Excellent. Okay. When an allegation of excessive force is exonerated, doesn't that mean that the city believes that the officer's conduct is acceptable?
Yes, it's essentially saying that it didn't occur. It really, I would say it's even beyond that. I would say it's more so in lines of it just didn't occur.
Okay. Well, then I guess let me ask you, what is the distinction between exonerated and not sustained?
Not sustained would mean that there is not sufficient facts or evidence to support sustaining the charge. Exonerated means this officer was fully justified, start to finish.
Okay. Would you be surprised to learn that Defendant Vickers was exonerated on the claim of excessive force based on Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.2, which is the video that we watched a moment ago?
I would not expect him to be exonerated.
Do you find that problematic?
Yes, I find it problematic.
And what can you explain to me why you find that to be problematic?
I think that the level of force doesn't seem consistent with the incident, beginning with the unmarked car and no blue lights. And I also I'm wondering why that file didn't make it to my office. I request to see use of force files. And I don't know why it wasn't sent to my office to review.
So that you would expect to see a file like that, like a file like the one that we just looked at should have been sent to your office.
My personal policy was I wanted to see use of force files. So yes.
And just I want to make sure that I understand when you say use of force file, that your personal policy was to see use of force files. Do you mean like the more egregious ones, or did you personally want to review all use of force investigations?
I wanted, certainly if an investigation came out of internal affairs that was sustained use of force, I would expect to see that.
Okay. Do you know investigator Arthur Nixon with OPS?
I do.
What's your opinion of investigator Nixon?
He's solid. He's very solid.
Now I'd like to share my screen with you if you'll bear with me for a moment. Can you see what appears to be the deposition of 30B6 Arthur Nixon?
Yes. They do, yes.
Do you see the highlighted text beginning on line 5 that says, do you think there's anything wrong with the way Defendant Vickers acted in Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.2? And Investigator Nixon says yes. And then do you see where beginning on line 9, it says, do you think that Defendant Vickers was justified in his use of force? And there's an objection. And then picking up on line 14, Investigator Nixon says, again, I would have handled it differently. I wouldn't have tackled somebody like that for a swiping of the hand. So I would not have tackled.
I see that, yes.
What do you think about that testimony in the context of an exonerated finding?
I think that I would agree with Investigator Nixon.
Okay, and do you know SPO Patrick Fight?
I do.
And he was an APD instructor and currently is an APD instructor on use of force, specifically while you were the chief of police, correct?
He is one of several instructors, yes.
Okay. And what do you think of SPO Fight professionally?
I have a huge amount of respect for him as well. He's solid.
And I'd like to show you some of his testimony from this case. And I guess before I do this, do you have an understanding of what 30B6 testimony means?
I do not.
Okay. So 30B6 is when the city of Atlanta appoints a representative to give testimony, and that testimony is on behalf of the city of Atlanta. So this is effectively the city of Atlanta's testimony, since the city cannot testify for itself.
Thank you.
So you can see the cover page that says 30B6 Patrick Fight?
I can, yes.
Okay, excellent. All right. So the testimony that we're gonna look at is on 2 pages. So if you'll be patient with me. So do you see on page 16, line 24, where it says, so I'm going to ask the question again. That was an answer, but I don't think it answered my question. And that's based on what you saw, Mr. Fight. Was the use of force justified in the video? And then Mr. Fight responds on behalf of the city, from what I saw, I wouldn't think so.
I see that, yes.
And I think we've established this already, but you agree with SPO Fight that Vickers' use of force was not justified, correct?
I agree.
So what I'd like to ask you is, do you find it problematic that 2 senior ranking officers, including the person who investigated Vickers, thought that Vickers' use of force was excessive, but Vickers was not punished for the use of force that he used, or the force that he used?
It is problematic, yes.
And why is that problematic?
I think that, and to be fair, sometimes your use of force instructors can be very literal and they have the benefit of looking in the box and saying, well, we teach that and therefore it is okay. So I'm not going to suggest that I always align with the use of force instructors, because my picture is much larger. I do think, though, that when you have 2 individuals who are tasked and trained at the levels Nixon and Fight are, again, I go back to this file should have come to Chief Coit, come to Chief Shields. And I maybe Coit saw it, but I don't remember seeing any of this, and I would have had trouble with this.
If a police officer can be exonerated on excessive force allegations based on what you saw in Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.2, would you agree that the department would need some changes to its disciplinary procedures?
I definitely think that what I'm seeing is a line has to be added requiring internal affairs to submit to the chief's office for the chief's signature all use of force files prior to them being closed out.
If the city is okay with Defendant Vickers' conduct that you saw in Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.2, would you agree that APD needs to address its use of force policies, or at least, sorry, let me restate that question and break that down. I'm sorry. If the city is okay with Defendant Vickers' conduct that you saw in Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.2, would you agree APD might need to address its use of force policies?
Well, I think that the city's not okay with it, which is why Nixon, Fight, and Shields are saying we would have handled this differently. So I think what we're looking at is who weighed in on this that felt this was appropriate to overturn. What level of training do we need to be affording them, or discipline? So I think what I see is there's something at a supervisory level that is not occurring that needs to occur. But I don't think it's APD, because you clearly, as you just demonstrated, we don't agree with this, which is why I'm curious who thought this was appropriate.
Sure. But so is it not true that strike that. So earlier you testified that a finding of exonerated, it means that the city finds that the conduct is acceptable, correct? And Investigator Nixon, who testified in this case that it was not justified, issued that finding of exonerated, correct? So how does the city—
Wait, no, but I didn't know that. What are you saying, that Nixon did exonerate?
So Nixon was the OPS investigator who issued the exonerated finding.
Oh, no, I didn't know that. I thought that OPS sustained it and that the supervisors overturned it in the field.
OPS exonerated Defendant Vickers on this.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's a key point. I didn't know that.
This didn't even— I'm sorry.
Well, so this didn't even make it out of OPS then.
So does that change your opinion? Is that a problem?
It's a huge problem.
How do we fix that problem so it doesn't happen in the future?
I think that, this is why, and that use of force is just going to have to be reviewed, mandatory reviewed. You're going to have to prescribe that the deputy chief, the assistant chief, and the chief will all sign off on all use of force files, because clearly if OPS exonerated this, that's a much larger issue. I didn't realize that.
Would it be problematic if OPS twice investigated an officer and found that that officer used excessive force, but both times the chain of command dismissed the finding?
The same officer was sustained by OPS, and then the chain of command dismissed the finding. Is that what we're asking?
Correct, on two separate occasions. Would that factual scenario be problematic?
It could be, but I think that you've just shown that OPS, it appears, doesn't always have the best judgment.
Are you familiar with a scenario where that happens, where OPS sustains an allegation of excessive force, but then a supervisor dismisses the allegation?
It's happened. Yes, that's happened. Sure.
Is that something that happens frequently?
I honestly, I don't know. I think we could probably get the data from OPS so you'd have a better picture.
if the data showed that that does happen frequently, would that be a problem?
It would, to me, it would require further exploration. I would be concerned. I won't go so far as to say it's a problem, but I think it's certainly a red flag.
If that were the case, wouldn't OPS lose that objectivity that we were talking about earlier that was so important to the process?
So if it leaves OPS sustained, it comes back not sustained, would OPS lose its objectivity? Is that what you're asking?
Sure.
I don't know that they'd lose their objectivity.
Well, I guess let me ask it this way then. If a police officer supervisor can dismiss allegations of excessive force despite an OPS investigation finding excessive force, does OPS's independent investigation really mean anything?
Oh, I think it does. I mean, I think, and that's where every scenario is different. I think, you know, why did they not sustain it? Did OPS not do a quality investigation? Were there witnesses that were not spoken to that needed to be spoken to? I mean, I'd like to think that everything that comes out of OPS is flawless, but as we've just shown, it's not. So I don't know that I could agree with that specifically.
Okay. I want to go through two of Vickers' prior use of force cases with you. If you give me just a moment to share my screen. Can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 53 on your screen?
Okay, yes, I can.
And you see the highlighted text that shows that Vickers was sustained on an excessive force allegation.
I see that, yes.
And and you see that the date is October 16th, 2011, before this case happened.
Yes, I see that.
Now let me, I want to share the proposed adverse action from this case, that complaint. Can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 52 on your screen?
I can, yes.
And you see that there's highlighted text that where the city proposed a 5-day suspension for Vickers based on his use of excessive force?
Yes.
And we're going to go to page 2. Do you see where the highlighted text that says you sprayed Mr. Usher with your city issued OC gas?
I see that, yep.
And do you see where it says Mr. Usher complained that you kicked him several times as he was getting into the vehicle?
Yes, I see that.
Okay, now I want to show another document, and this will not be a lettered exhibit to the deposition. But do you see what appears to be a memo from Lieutenant Webb saying that the final disposition should be changed from sustained to not sustained on Vickers' excessive force case?
I see that, yes.
And does that seem problematic to you that an officer can pepper spray and kick a citizen in the back and then have his supervisor change the outcome of the OPS investigation?
Well, what I'm seeing is Deputy Chief Finley. So, I mean, that's one of your highest ranking members, has overturned it, and he issued a letter stating his reasoning, and I would want to see that. Because I mean, obviously there's two different narratives between Vickers and the complainant on whether he was kicked or not.
Well, I guess from a philosophical or from a common sense perspective, does it seem wrong that OPS said that it was not okay for Vickers to pepper spray and kick a citizen. The body that investigated the case and spoke to witnesses and looked at footage, but his supervisor said that it was okay and let him off the hook.
I think that what you have pointed out through the Vickers case is it's not okay to further empower OPS. And so I think the whole purpose of having a chain of command review is so that all mitigating factors are heard and that the people who are supervisors and who have been entrusted to run the police department have an opportunity to view these files and weigh in. At the end of the day, an investigator or a sergeant in internal affairs does not have, they're not high ranking. They don't have many of them don't have any supervisory experience. And that's why it's imperative that you have assistant chiefs, deputy chiefs, and majors that can conduct these investigations, reviews of these files in a sound manner. So I think it has to be holistically more cohesive. But no, I don't think you can just shift power from one to the other and think that that's gonna work well.
I want to show another exhibit. Can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 59 on your screen?
I can, yep.
So I'm going to flip to page 2 here. Do you see the highlighted text alleging that Vickers used excessive force when he rammed a citizen into a glass door?
Yes.
And then we'll go back to page 1. And he was sustained for that conduct, correct?
Yes.
No, can you see my screen? It's another internal memo from the city of Atlanta from Deputy Chief Glazier this time, changing the outcome of that investigation from sustained to not sustained. And feel free to take your time to look over the letter.
I do see the memo and that they've referenced significant information has been added to this file from when it was originally disseminated. And so it was overturned, yes.
Okay. Does it seem wrong that OPS said it was not okay for Vickers to slam a handcuffed citizen into a door, but his supervisor once again said it was okay and let him off the hook?
Let's go over what the deputy chief, what information the deputy chief unearthed that does not appear within the OPS file.
So in order to answer that question, you would need more information, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show one more OPS document for Vickers T. Can you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 56 on your screen?
Yes,
Do you see where Vickers was suspended without pay for 3 days?
I do.
We'll go to page 2. And if you want to take a minute to read through that, and then I'll ask you a question. And just let me know when you're ready.
Yes, I see it.
Okay. Does Plaintiff's Exhibit 56 show that Defendant Vickers was suspended for aiming an assault rifle at 3 citizens at Underground Atlanta?
I see that, I can get the photos out of here. I see that he pointed at your badge, that he walked in with a rifle. Let's see if I can get our pictures off here. Yes, now I see it. Yes, you're correct.
Is it okay for the city of Atlanta to employ a police officer who has aimed a loaded assault rifle at citizens for no reason, unnecessarily pepper sprayed and kicked a citizen in the back, and slammed a citizen into the glass door?
No.
Would you agree that the factual scenario?
Objection, but you can answer.
Would you agree that the factual scenario that I just described is indicative of a discipline problem in APD?
I wouldn't go that far.
And it's also saying I'm sorry.
What did you say, Ms. Miller?
I was objecting, and it's also saying my internet is unstable. Again, and I'm not exactly sure how to resolve that issue.
Okay, what would you like us to do?
That's a good question, because if I'm not able to get my objections on the record, I don't think that we need to, that we can proceed like this. Okay.
You want me to just allow more time, Stacy, before I respond?
So the issue is that on my end, it sounds like everything is fine. But then when I object, then I hear people talking and I'm like, wait, so obviously it was missed in the translation. So I'm not exactly sure how to resolve this issue. And I do apologize. This is my first time having this type of issue.
Do we need Ms. Parks to step in and take over?
I was just about to interject to say that I believe that it is an Xfinity issue, because my internet had the same issue a couple of minutes ago. But I know—
I'd like to go off the record.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Because I'm wondering if Ms. Miller, if you called in on your phone, your video may come and go or freeze, but your audio from your phone would be more stable, if that would help you.
Okay, let me try that. Let's see.
And Ms. Davis, once we go back on the record, I'm going to ask you to reread the question where I said, is it? Okay. Everyone good?
Hold on.
Sure.
Come on. Sorry.
No worries.
That's the old deaf dog who woke up and smells the plumber. So I thought I was going to be able to get her to sleep through the meeting, so I apologize.
No worries. No worries. So I guess, Ms. Davis, if you would not mind reading back the question that began with, is it okay for the city of Atlanta to employ a police officer who has, and then Chief Shields' response to that, and then I will ask questions following off from there.
1 moment, please.
Thank you.
Question. So is it okay for the city of Atlanta to employ a police officer who has aimed a loaded assault rifle at citizens for no reason, unnecessarily pepper sprayed and kicked a citizen in the back, and slammed a citizen into a glass door? Answer: no.
Okay. And then, so my question to follow up is, would you agree that the factual scenario described in that question is indicative of a discipline problem within the APD?
Matt, I had an objection to that previous question, and I'm guessing you guys didn't hear it. So I'm glad I made that stop that we just had. And then an objection to this question as well.
And what's the basis?
I think it's a misstatement of the factor and evidence. So that's the basis. You can
Okay.
keep going.
Noted. So Chief Shields, I'll restate the question for you. Would you agree that the factual scenario from the previous question is indicative of a discipline problem within APD?
I don't know if it's widespread, but I will definitely say that clearly we're not doing all that we need to do. Whether it's a discipline problem or a procedural problem, I imagine it's a blend. Clearly there's procedurally adjustments that have to be made to ensure that this is not happening.
Is it okay for APD to have officers like Vickers on its payroll?
Again, I did not get to see what Deputy Chief Glazier, what his letter was. I did not get to see what Deputy Chief Finley's letter was. And I think in fairness, I would want to see their response. But what I will say is for those two incidents, but the pointing of the rifle everyone seemed to agree on that. And the tackling, everyone seemed to agree on. And I think the pointing of the rifle alone would have seemed to have risen to the level of a dismissal. So that's a long answer, but the short answer is he does not need to be on the payroll, no.
Is it fair to say that the purpose of punishing police misconduct is to deter future misconduct?
It's certainly a component of it. I think it's also, if you're on the receiving end of it, you want to believe that the individuals committing the infractions are held accountable.
Is it fair to say that if police misconduct goes unpunished, it's more likely to continue occurring?
I think that by the individual who's committing the act, yes. I think that, so when you have a Vickers who is not held accountable, you're not messaging to him that his behavior was unacceptable. So there is obviously an increased likelihood that will occur.
Okay. You read my mind a little bit here. So just a minute ago, we covered 3 instances in which Vickers used force or violence but received no punishment. Would you agree that Vickers is more likely to use force in the future because he has not been punished?
Objection. You can answer.
I don't know, but what I will say is he has to be held accountable for what he did. And that to me is a problem.
Do you agree that it doesn't really seem like Vickers has learned a lesson, unless the lesson is that you can use force and get away with it?
Objection. So you can answer.
I would feel more comfortable if I had seen the memos that Chief Finley and Chief Glazier did. I would feel more comfortable before I just outright say that there's a pattern. What I will say is the rifle incident is very concerning. Yeah.
What's going to happen when Vickers uses force against another citizen in the future?
Objection. You can answer if you know.
I think the department will find itself right back in this scenario.
Do you think that, let me rephrase that. Based on your experience, 25 years of experience as a police officer and working with police officers, what's the likelihood of Vickers using force again?
There seems to be, let me say, a greater likelihood of him using force again than perhaps the person next to him.
All right, I want to show you 2 video clips and then ask questions based on those 2 video clips, if you'll give me just a second. Do you have any regrets about the way that you treated Mr. Griffin?
Yeah, I mean, I should have called the ambulance for starters. Like, looking back, yeah, I definitely should have done that.
And then lastly, is there anything that you'd like to say to Mr. Griffin while we're on the record?
Yeah, sorry he went through that. I don't ever want to see anybody get hurt. I don't want to see anybody go through any level of struggle. I'm sorry that he's in this position.
Do you have any regrets about the way that you treated Mr. Griffin?
No, sir.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to Mr. Griffin on the record?
No, sir.
Chief Shields, which one of these officers seems like they learned something from this experience?
Officer Abad.
Which one of these officers do you think is more likely to use force in the future?
Vickers.
If looking at the same investigations, Acrb frequently finds excessive force and sustains allegations, but OPS dismisses the same allegations, is that problematic?
Yes.
Why is that problematic?
I think that what I'm seeing is who is making the decision for these use of force to be not sustained or dismissed. And I think that it seems apparent that there has to be a greater level of involvement by the highest ranking individuals in APD command in all use of force files. And yeah.
Excuse me, if ACRB keeps finding excessive force where OPS does not, how long should it take for the city to look at that?
Objection, so you can answer.
I think that what I would hope would be that the department would recognize that. And I still believe that if you have the proper people looking at these files, people who understand where policing needs to get to, that APD has the capacity to hold people accountable. But for whatever reason, they're definitely, what we're seeing today is there's definitely some stopgaps where that just are not acceptable.
If ACRB, who represents the city or the citizens of the city of Atlanta, keeps finding excessive force where OPS does not, don't you think the city should look into whether OPS is properly investigating allegations of excessive force?
I think that it's appropriate for the department to have to respond, and I coordinate with the ACRB better. I will not say that outsourcing solves issues, and that's one of the issues you see is when folks have not trained on how to use this, have no idea what it's like to have to arrest someone, no idea what it's like to have to fight for your life. It's very easy when you sit in an office to write policy. So I think that if you're going to talk about you feel something needs further examination, it's imperative that there's actually individuals at the table who understand what the job entails, but also understand the significance of getting it right.
Would you agree that numerous instances, or I'll be more specific. Would you agree that 7 distinct instances where ACRB investigated excessive force and found excessive force, but OPS or the city rejected those findings and let the officers completely off the hook, either with a not sustained or exonerated? Do you think that that would be evidence of a problem with the city's disciplinary process?
No, and this goes back to what I said earlier, is you find that you've got civilians who are applying what they think is the appropriate work rule, and it may not be relevant at all. And so I think it's worth exploring. You definitely can open those files back up, look at them. But again, we've had issues in the past with the ACRB putting work rules on that just didn't apply at all to what was the incident at hand. So I wouldn't want to dismiss it outright, but I also wouldn't feel comfortable just signing off saying that their findings are gospel either.
Would your opinion change if the investigators, the ACRB investigators, had real world experience investigating internal affairs cases?
No, because Art Nixon has real world experience.
Have you ever given a deposition in a civil case involving the use of excessive force before today?
Yes.
How many depositions would you say that you've given in those types of cases?
Not that many. Couple, I think. One was when I first came on. It was like in 95 or 96. Maybe I don't know, a couple.
As chief of police, were you made aware of each time an excessive force lawsuit was filed against the city of Atlanta?
No,
As chief of police, did you have any involvement with excessive force lawsuits?
some I knew of and others I did not.
Do you know how many excessive force lawsuits are pending right now against the city of Atlanta?
No,
When an excessive force lawsuit is settled, does the chief of police have any involvement in that decision?
no, not usually.
When you say not usually, what do you mean?
I think I can remember more so when Chief Turner was in office that I would get calls that a settlement, a dollar amount was going to be settled, and to run it by Chief Turner and see if he was all right with that, whether it was excessive force or something else. It's not so much been the practice under the Mayor Bottoms administration as it was under Mayor Reed's. It's a little different. I don't think the calls have been, it's just been a different process. So.
Are you familiar with the concept of Monell liability?
No.
Have you ever heard that phrase in the context of a police brutality case?
I don't believe so.
Do you have an understanding of what supports liability against the city of Atlanta in a police brutality case versus liability of the officer using the force?
I haven't. So you're trying to ask me if I'm aware of, like, if there's a culture, then you can go after the city, as opposed to the individual, you can go after the individual. Is that somewhat the ballpark?
Well, so yeah, what's your understanding of the distinction in, like, the level of proof?
I'm not certain what the level of proof is. I think that certainly if the training shows that it's officers are being improperly trained, then the city would be liable. If there's a policy that is poorly written or doesn't take into account state law, the city would be liable. Most of the time, what you see, though, is the behaviors of the officers are a far cry of what they've been trained on when there's an incident that's in question.
Do you think that the city ought to be held responsible for police officers' excessive force where the city knew that that officer was a risk, but repeatedly failed to discipline that officer?
I mean, I think you're applying it to today, obviously. Knew of the risk. I think you would have to look at the situation. Every situation is different, but I do think if there is a proven pattern of misconduct and the person was not appropriately disciplined, then that's an issue.
So is it your testimony that when you say that's an issue, is it your testimony that where there is a pattern of misconduct and the city does not do anything about it, they should be held responsible, where that officer then causes an injury to a citizen?
I think if it can be shown that the city was negligent in its handling of an officer, then obviously that's a problem that goes beyond just the officer.
In this specific case, do you think the city should be responsible for what happened to Tyler Griffin?
I would really want to see the memos that Chief Finley and Chief Glazier submitted so that I would feel that I'm looking at the level playing field, what influenced their decision. They were both very senior, respected people. They're both police chiefs, and they were about doing the right thing. So I would want to hear what they heard. I would want to know that before I would just go from point A to Z.
Do you think it's hypocritical for Mayor Bottoms to talk about systemic police brutality on television while the city's lawyers deny that there's a problem in the courtroom?
Objection. But you can answer.
No, because I think she's a politician, and I think politicians go, they often say things that are going to make good sound bites. And I think let me say this. I think that the law department is much more familiar with the nature of the actual incidents that are occurring than the mayor's office.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
I do have a few questions before we go. Just based upon what Mr. Khan has asked you. First, you testified earlier that you were a supervisor for the city of Atlanta, APD. As a supervisor, were you always aware of an officer's OPS investigations as they were going on?
No.
Okay. And as a supervisor, did you do yearly and quarterly performance evaluations?
Yes.
And as a part of those yearly and quarterly performance evaluations, did you ever, did you always consider whether an officer had an OPS investigation open?
No.
You've also watched a couple videos today, one of them being the entire video of the incident between Officer Abad and Mr. Griffin from Abad's body-worn camera. Were you able to hear a car revving in that video?
I may have. I may have.
What was the question? I couldn't hear that.
Were you able to hear a car revving in the video? Can you hear me?
Objection, vague.
Okay. And in that same video, it was Plaintiff's Exhibit 1. Did you see Officer Abad approach the vehicle?
I did.
That Mr. Griffin was driving. I'm sorry. I kind of left you hanging on that one. Okay. And as Officer Abad approached the vehicle, do you know whether his weapon was aimed at Mr. Griffin or was in low ready?
Objection, leading.
You can answer.
I can answer. It appeared as though it was initially aimed at him and then went to low ready.
Okay. If Officer Abad believed that the car was revving its engine at him, would it have been proper or appropriate for Abad to have the gun at low ready?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence and improper hypothetical.
You can answer.
Yes.
Okay. Did you see in that same video, Plaintiff 1, Mr. Griffin swipe Abad's hand away?
Objection leading.
I actually, I heard her say that that occurred, but I couldn't actually see that, no.
Objection.
Okay, did you see it in any of the videos today?
Did I see him swipe his hand away in any other video? Is that what you said?
Yes.
No.
Would swiping a hand away be resisting arrest in your opinion?
Objection leading and vague.
Yes.
Okay. And based upon your years of experience as an officer, when a suspect is resisting arrest, can an officer use force to effectuate the arrest?
Objection vague.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a difference between a courtesy violation and a use of excessive force violation within APD?
Yes.
And what is the difference, if you could just summarize it?
Courtesy is more along the lines of verbal, you're disrespectful, whereas use of force is typically synonymous with some physical encounter between the suspect and the officer.
Okay. You talked a little bit also about your experience at OPS. Based upon your knowledge of those practices of OPS, could a person be sustained for courtesy, but then not sustained on excessive force in an investigation?
Oh, absolutely. They're completely different.
Okay. And also based upon your experience at OPS, were you ever aware of an instance in which a commander changed an outcome of an investigation from sustained to not sustained?
Yes, that did occur.
And what was your understanding of the appropriateness of that type of situation?
Objection vague.
Well, the whole point, it was appropriate, which is because that's what the disciplinary manual is designed to do. It's designed to allow those individuals who are actually supervisors the opportunity to review the file, identify if there's any deficiencies. You know, you want internal affairs to be objective, but it's like anything. When you work something and you become immersed in the document, at some point you personalize it. And I think the whole command process is designed to ensure that there is a level of objectivity, one way or another, afforded to the file.
And in your experience as an OPS, at OPS, did you ever have a situation where a subordinate disagreed with a supervisor?
Yes.
Based upon the memo that you were shown from Deputy Chief Finley, do you know whether Deputy Chief Finley was a direct supervisor of Vickers?
I don't know. I can speculate, but no, I don't know.
Okay, and would a deputy chief be a direct supervisor of an officer?
That's how it should be. So, I mean, occasionally, like if a deputy chief had to go out for extended sick leave, the files are going to shift to another deputy chief. but the policy is structured so that the direct supervisor will be weighing in on an employee's file who is under their command.
Okay, and how many levels of command would it be from an officer to the deputy chief?
You're going to go through, typically, depending on how many supervisors are at a work site, you're going to have the first line sergeant, second line lieutenant, third line, there may or may not be a captain, then the major, and then the deputy chief. You might have a specialized unit where there's no captain.
Okay, so there may be, if my numbers are correct, 6 or 7 levels of or degrees of difference between an officer and then the deputy chief.
Well, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, major, deputy chief. So that's 5 if there is a captain. And if there's not a captain, there's 4.
Okay. So is it, so would a deputy chief have a day-to-day interaction with an officer in his chain of command?
Typically not, no.
Going back to the incident that Mr. Khan showed you involving the rifle, do you know what led to Vickers pulling the rifle?
No.
All right, and I just have a few more questions. Does the ACRB have to agree with OPS investigations?
No.
Okay, does OPS have to agree with ACRB investigations?
No.
Is it possible to have a difference in the outcome of an ACRB investigation and an OPS investigation based on different factors?
Objection, vague.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, so if I can answer then? We're good?
Yes, you can answer.
Okay. Yes, of course they can have different outcomes, different factors.
Okay, what would some of those factors be that may lead to a different outcome from ACRB than OPS?
The witnesses that were spoken to, the evidence that was collected, and it may just be an opinion. The idea is it's 2 independent investigations, and they're not really designed to communicate along the way to make sure that each entity is speaking to or taking the same steps as the other entity.
Okay, and I think this is going to be my final question, but I'll have to consult with co-counsel. Do you currently hold a law degree?
No.
Okay, if I can have just 2 minutes to consult with a co-counsel, and I think we may be wrapping it up.
Okay, let's reconvene at 12:15. I'm gonna run to the bathroom real quick.
Put it on mute. Block the video.
More question.
Sure, I'm here and ready.
Okay. Are we back on the record?
Yes, ma'am.
Chief Shields, this is, I believe, going to be my last question. Are you aware of a policy or practice of use of unnecessary force in APD?
Yes.
Okay. And what is that use of unnecessary, what is that policy or practice?
It basically prescribes that the officer shall use that force which is only reasonable and necessary to get an individual in custody.
Okay. Are you aware of a practice of officers using unnecessary force?
Am I aware of what? I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. Are you aware of a widespread practice of officers using unnecessary force in APD?
No.
Okay, that's all I have.
No further questions for me either. Chief Shields, thank you so much. I know you probably had better things to do with your morning, but we really do appreciate it.
All right, y'all. Thank you for your time.